Coming up on the YouTube.
How's it going, YouTube world?
Good morning. Hopefully everybody is shoveled out.
Oh,
Let's get this stuff tweeted. Pull up Blue Sky.
shining on me.
There. Forward. Hello there, and welcome to the Hawkeye Hotspot podcast here on hawkfanatic.com. It is Thursday, February the 13th, 9:16 a.m. Central Time. Rob Howe, joined by Scott Docterman from the Athletic. Scott, big Valentine's Day plans tomorrow night?
No, unfortunately, it's one that we don't really get into anymore. And I think staying home sounds like the likely option, and I guess I'll take that. So, how about you, Rob? You got any going out to dinner?
We're traveling to St. Louis for club volleyball, weather permitting. So that's we'll be in tight quarters in the car for Valentine's Day. And
There you go.
hopefully don't hit a deer,
Yeah.
get in and slide off the road on Avenue of the Saints. Those things that happen during winter driving in the Midwest, as those folks know that are listening in our footprint. A lot of snow this week, but perhaps more on the way. So winter is not done with us. The groundhog told us, Scott, and here we are.
Yeah, it's weird because a few days ago I was sitting there going, you feel like you're cheating, when you're getting this deep into winter and we've had a little bit of snow, for one what like right around Christmas, 4 or 5
Yeah.
inches at some point, and then it was the rest of it has just been a really modest. And I'm like, what's this mean for where we live with farmers and stuff? As far as well, we found out that winter said, you know, forget me not, so I think this is where we are.
And
As
winter
far,
is basketball, right? That's why
yeah.
they play it inside. Um, and we they played it inside on the road. Two games this week: the Iowa men and women. The women on Monday night with a revenge victory in Lincoln against Nebraska, and really, really one of their better efforts, I thought, of the year against the quality opponent, 81-66 in that one. And then last night, the Hawkeye men with a much needed road win, its first of the year, as a matter of fact, 84-73 in Piscataway against Rutgers. Let's start with the women's, Scott. 5 game winning streak after a 5 game losing streak. And we've gone through this process with in the podcast through the season here and just kind of week to week saying, what is this team going to be? How is this team going to develop? Because both teams had a lot of new pieces and we're trying to build chemistry and continuity and you know, have an upward trajectory as the season went on. And it feels like the women have hit that now, and there's optimism. The men last night, good win. Just injuries have been killer with them. And again, we'll get to them later, but it just feels like the women right now have some momentum. And we talked about this prior, Scott. Those in that 5 game losing streak, it was by 4.8 points per game. So they were there. They were right there. They just couldn't close. Now, in this one, starting, in the 5 game winning streak, starting with the 25-point win in Seattle against Washington, they've won by 11.8 points per game. So 7 more points, figure that out. It's a 11-point swing, whatever it was. Um, and they've gelled. They've figured out how to close. Players are finding their roles. And I have numbers on Lucy Olson during the 5 game skid and the 5 game losing streak, which I'll read after getting your thoughts here. But she was brought in to do what she's doing now, and they're playing defense. It feels like this team is coming together now. 3 of the next 5 games are really going to be hard,
Mhm.
but you feel better about their chances. UCLA and Ohio State. I don't feel
Yeah.
good about those chances, but you just feel better about their chances to compete now after what we've seen here the last 5 games.
Yeah, absolutely. This team is surging. It's found its rhythm, and it is Lucy Olson. I think there is a definite clear line in how these players have played before Lucy Olson when she was really struggling versus how she's played when she's been very good. The results add up to that. I think when she was missing every shot in the fourth quarter, I can't remember which one it was. I think it was Oregon, maybe in the free throw line, she was struggling. That was the difference, and that she was the player that needed to be better. And then since she's kind of on this realm here, I mean, like Nebraska, she wasn't even on the floor. What late in the game, she was 3 of 12. And then she was 2 of 12 at Oregon. I mean, there was just missed a lot of free throws against Nebraska, but over the last 5 games, she's been just outstanding. And that's been the difference because I think what it's done is it's allowed this team to then play their roles. Now that you have your leading scorer who does everything that that you brought her in to do, now everybody else can feed off of that and play their role. Sydney Falter, you're hitting threes, you're being a junkyard dog, getting all these rebounds, and being the tough kid that you are. It's allowed Taylor McCabe, go ahead and shoot your threes. Kylie Feuerbach, play defense and be a 3-and-D player once in a while, but primarily lock down the best scorer on the other team. It's allowed that rotation in the post with Hannah Stolke and Addie O'Grady to come in, kind of like we saw different players, but a similar system as Gable Lashani and Adam Woodbury.
Yeah.
Just kind of in and out, in different ways. And then you look, at some of the other players that have been able to, the 4 freshmen have been able to come in and they've had their freshman moments. I mean, Aaliyah Guyton was really good for a while. She's kind of hit a rut. It happens with freshmen, yet they're able to overcome that because Lucy Olson has been in her element and playing so well. That has really been, to me, the key in how this season is resurrected from being 2-6 in the Big Ten to now being 7-6 in the tournament and surging to the point where you feel like, all right, this team can be competitive with most of the teams in the country on a given night.
Yeah, and you figure if games go chalk, which we know that's not the case, you're looking they're going to be underdogs in 3 of the 5 and heavy
Probably.
favorites in the other 2. So
Yeah.
you figure that gets you to 9 wins. Can you get one more to get to 10-8? 9-9 still okay, but now it just feels like they're playing with tournament seeding.
Yeah. And that's great because where they were a couple of weeks ago, Rob, and we had that question back and forth, which team do you think has a better chance? And for a couple of weeks there, it felt like the men, especially after they beat Indiana and Iowa women were just continuously losing close games. Now it's there's not even a debate. And I think when you look at the final 5, tonight is a layup.
Yep.
Unless even if they don't play well, they still should win this game. At Ohio State on Monday, I expect them to play really hard. Now, does that turn into a win? Unlikely, but they're capable of playing well and maybe pulling out a win.
You just feel better about it now than you did a couple weeks ago, that they have a puncher's chance now. Whereas a few weeks ago when they were in the skid, you're like, Ohio State and UCLA, this could be a bad look. And now you figure they'll compete.
Yeah. UCLA will be a play hard at home game. That one I would not bet the money line on Iowa. The one out of the 5 that I think that they've got a coin flip chance, and that's at Michigan. They're in comparable situations. I mean, Michigan is they are 28 in net. Iowa's 29. Michigan's 9-5. Iowa's 7-6, but they play different teams. That one to me is one that if Iowa plays well, it could win.
Be nice if it was here.
Yeah, sure. I look at it kind of like the Oregon game in some ways.
Yeah.
That if you play well there, if you shoot well, you should win. If not, it's going to come down to the end and you might not win.
That's that. That's that. Have you built during the season that toughness? Because you're on the road, you're going to have to play well in the last 4 minute stretch of that game. Can you close on the road? And didn't really get in that the other night with Nebraska because they controlled that game more. But if it's tight at Michigan, can they pull one of those out on the road? Did well at Minnesota.
Yeah. And I would say the last two games in particular showed they're capable of it. You know, the
Yep.
one thing with Nebraska was it wasn't necessarily close, but it was for a long time.
Yeah.
And then they were able to hit threes
They
and
kept answering Nebraska because Nebraska kept coming.
yeah, they kept coming and they had to play with a crazy called game. And whether it's unfair or stupid, whatever you want to use to describe it, the officiating mattered in that game. It took players out in the first quarter significantly against Alexis Markowski, and she's a really good post. And yet they were able to fill in. Ava Hayden had a really good performance, and you had your two posts basically out for a big chunk of that first half because of the calls, and they were able to compensate. And Sydney Falter got in foul trouble, and and then in the second half, probably the most ridiculous call I've seen, that the official needs to kind of probably say, you know what, you need to watch this a little closer, because that was a great block by Addison O'Grady that she got called for a foul. It was all ball, and I'm like, yeah, do a better job here. You're anticipating it. But that said, they went to two tougher environments against rivals in their neighborhood, and they took care of business. And you could see the confidence there. They took the opponent out of their game, and in some cases, they actually performed better at the opponent's strengths than their opponent did. 3-point shooting is Nebraska's MO, and Iowa was a much better 3-point shooting team that night. That is impressive. And then Minnesota takes care of the ball really well. Iowa did too, and then Iowa was able to really rally and and push forward in that game. So, whatever happens over the next 5, provided that they win tonight and win against Wisconsin and look like they're competing in some of those games, I think you feel good about the trajectory of this team, this program. People getting all antsy about Jan Jensen back a few weeks ago, and people, I was kind of pissed because somebody dug up like a tweet on my column when I said Iowa made the right choice with Jan Jensen, and somebody's like, "Oh, did they really?" And I'm like, "Are you kidding me?" They've got 4 new starters. They got a new coach. They're playing on the road. The Big Ten is so much better than it was even last year, and it was good last year. And yet they're losing all these close games, and now you're ready to just shove it in my ear, about this. And I'm like, yeah, give me a break. Not even going to dignify your comment. So anyway, I'm ranting, so I better stop myself here.
But you're right, and you make a good point too with the Big Ten and the tournament. And this is the type of Iowa team that can make a run in an event like that. And with the league being as good as it is, if Iowa can make a deep run in the Big Ten tournament, and they'll get more quality wins. And again, you're just trying to push yourself up to as high a seed as you can get, because again, it's important in college basketball. It's especially important in women's college basketball when you have home court advantage in the first 2 rounds. You want to give yourself, if you're not going to host, the best possible seeding and matchup, at least on paper, in that first round and second round, and give yourself a chance to make the Sweet 16 with a winnable road game if you have to play on the road. And you mentioned Lucy Olson, Scott, and one of the I won't go through all the statistics between the when she was struggling during the skid and has played well during the streak. Just from a point standpoint, it was 12.2 to 22 points a game. So almost 10 points a game. That's obviously she's shooting the ball better. I won't go through those statistics. One statistic that stood out to me during the skid, She was 6 of 11 from the line.
Mhm.
11 foul shots in 5 games. During the streak, she's 18 of 25,
Mhm.
more than double the foul shots. She's more aggressive. She's
Mhm.
going all the way to the basket. She's opening things up with dribble penetration. She's got one of the better mid-range games you'll find around. It seemed like she was settling a little bit and deferring and not being as aggressive.
Yeah.
And I think that's all part of the feeling out process, this process of what is my role. Even though she was the third leading scorer in the country, it wasn't here. She had to work around, and the players that were here had to figure her out. And it just seems like they're feeding off each other now, where it was more of a struggle earlier on.
Yeah. Yeah, you look at every metric, she's doing so much better. And I think it is being aggressive. I think it's, the Washington game kind of gave everybody confidence and they needed it in the worst way, especially her, because she scores 20. She was what player of the week and was 8 of 8 from the field that day. And it was collective. Everybody felt good about their performance. It was a road trip. It was kind of what was desperately needed after all those close games, losses at home, and then they go to Oregon and do it too. But I think there was, it seemed like that there wasn't a lot of chemistry before that game and that trip, that you had factions and cliques, and you had the freshmen over here and you had the upperclassmen over here. Hannah Stolke had a concussion. It was just kind
Yeah.
of this, they were really divided, and when you're losing, those things really come to light. And in her case, she's been able to become aggressive, and I'd imagine that it's Jan must have kind of got to her or something and said, this is you be this for us, you be aggressive. And I think in a lot of cases you can tell by the way a player shoots how confident they are, that they're either timid or they're relaxed. And she seemed to be not very confident at the free throw line when she was 1 for 6 against Nebraska. It just felt like she was
Yeah.
tense. And sometimes you see that around the basket when people are missing bunnies that are just like, what are you doing? And the other thing is she's still aggressive. She still has similar turnover numbers, but
Yeah, it was
she's strong.
actually 3.4 in
Yeah.
the losing streak and in the winning streak, but the difference was the assist.
Yeah. She's
6.4 in the winning streak, 4.2 in the losing streak.
Yeah, she's totaled 17 turnovers over the 5 games, but 30 assists to
Yeah.
go along with 22 points a game. So when you're averaging, that's probably what, 15 points. Yeah, 15 points on those assists. You would say with 3 pointers and
Yeah.
twos, so 14 to 15, plus you're adding on her 22. She's responsible for roughly 35, 36 points a game. That's
1.6 steals a game, and she's
Yeah,
blocking some shots too. She's
yeah,
played well defensively. She's been one of the catalysts on the perimeter defense that's helped them play better. Obviously, you said Kylie Feuerbach is
yeah.
invaluable as a perimeter defender, but they're all being more active on the perimeter.
Exactly. And so you could just see the way their mannerisms, their efficacy at the games of the Minnesota game, the Nebraska game, that they're just really bought into each other. And Lucy is the catalyst for that. But everybody's fitting in their role. They all are valued. You look at the other day, I mean, Ava Hayden could have been, after sitting out 3 straight games, could have just been sulking and go in and whatever. No, she was really
Give
good.
AJ Edinger a set. She
Yes.
gets called on, she's ready, man, every time.
Yeah, exactly. And she's a senior. She's a beloved figure on that team. I mean, one of the more popular players, and you'll find, and just an interesting person in general. But yeah, and that's what's making this team kind of go, and why I would think that they finish well. They could be 2-3, 3-2. I think take your pick on how they finish. 9-9 in the Big Ten, 10-8. They go to the Big Ten tournament. It's going to be a tough second game for sure, and it's going to be a tough first game. I mean,
Great opportunities, though.
yeah. I mean, first game you're playing somebody like you in Indiana and Oregon and Nebraska, Minnesota, something like that. And then your second game, you're probably playing USC or UCLA again. And let's say not necessarily chalk, but just realistic good case scenario, you go 1-1. So if you go 3-2 and 1-1, 4-3 to finish, Rob, right now that puts Iowa at 21-10. You're probably a 6 or 7 seed. And I think if
Would
they
you
could,
say the net was?
that's 29.
So yeah, I mean, you can push that up into the top. If you can stay in the 20s, I think
Yeah.
that's good. I think that gets you a pretty nice seed and hopefully a winnable second round game.
If they could get to a 6,
Yeah.
that to me is territory where you feel like you can compete and do something with. 7 is a little tough
Yeah.
because what if you're playing you in a USC caliber team or a
Yeah.
UConn? 6 gets you in a game that's somebody maybe it's in a conference that isn't as good, or
Oklahoma.
right. Oh, that'd be interesting for a lot of reasons. But Zenny Bronchick.
I always think up devious matchups.
Yeah, that would be very interesting, no question. But no, if you get to be a 6 and you play an 11, that's a team that if you play well, you should beat. And then you play 3 and you play well again. I mean, what if this team did get to the Sweet 16? That would be well beyond what we really would expect, and certainly a month ago. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that would be, you talk about, it being somewhat of a rebuilding year after what you lost last year. If you make the Sweet 16 in a rebuilding year, you just really solidify and confirm your place on the landscape of women's basketball as a program that's, top 25, top 20, top 15 perennially. And that's where you want to be.
And you look, Rob, at the big picture ramifications of this. I mean, you unfortunately only get Lucy Olson for 1 year.
Yeah.
But you look at the recruits that they've brought in on that amazing day against USC, from Caitlin Clark's ceremony to what they did on the floor to winning like this. It inspires a lot of confidence in Jan Jensen, to go through a tough adversity, losing streak, and come out on the other side looking like this. Those players will see that and say, wow, look at the atmosphere here, look at the tradition, the history, and the trajectory is still really good. So I think overall, there's a lot to be happy with the women's program, and if they can lock up one of those open recruits right now who are really excited about what they witnessed on Caitlin Clark Day, I think this program is not going away. That this may be the blip. This may be the only time they're an 8 seed. Maybe they're top 4 in the Big Ten. As we know, the Big Ten is stacked where it's going to be a more challenging tournament than the first 2, maybe even first 3 rounds of the NCAA.
And good points. And when you're looking at, roster management now in this day and age of college basketball, Lucy Olson being a success is important more than just this season. It opens up the door for you in the transfer portal. It gets people that are donating money to your program more willing to do so when you have a hole to fill next time. All of these things are now considerations, Scott.
Yeah. Yeah. And what it helps is, we all know what the house settlement brings and how much money that could be dispersed. And when you're recruiting for top 50, top 25 players in the country, you're going to have to spend some more money, but it's also can come outside that 20 million window that there isn't, you just have to disclose it. So if there's a local business that decides, and it has to go through a clearinghouse, so it can't just be, hey, I'm going to pay the next Lucy, Kate Harpering, $1 million to sign 10 basketballs. So it has to be approved, but still it does add something to this that beyond what the department provides. And that's essential, because as we start talking about when the house settlement is finalized, when the money goes and is dispersed among the players, and the athletes, there's going to be a tug of war over dollars outside of football.
Yep.
I mean, whether it's $6.5, $7 million that's going to be in that category for other sports, and whether it's men's basketball or wrestling or women's basketball or baseball trying to get a piece, and softball or volleyball or what have you.
And I worry about the future of Olympic sports, man.
Yeah, it's you're gonna go on a tangent.
I know it's another separate discussion. We'll talk about that in May and June when
Yeah,
there's what is it? The horse platitudes
yeah, horse
section.
platitude. Yeah. Well,
But yeah, I mean, I'm with you. I mean, where there's going to be significant changes here coming before next school year,
yeah, because
most likely. We'll see.
what'll happen is certain schools will say we want to be good in everything, but we
Hmm.
have to be good in this. And in
Yep.
Iowa, that they're the big four, football, men's basketball, women's basketball, and wrestling. And that doesn't mean baseball is not important. That doesn't mean softball or field hockey isn't important, but you allocate your resources to being, in wrestling, if you're not at least second, it's a bad year. I mean, it is. It truly is a bad year. In women's basketball, I think the bar is set now to the point where you have to be good because people care. They're filling the arena. You're getting great recruits. You're watching you on TV and
And
all
you
that.
keep investing to keep that. You have to invest to
Yeah.
keep it.
You can't just write it out.
Yep.
Men's basketball needs a significant lift in a lot of areas. Some of it's coaching, a lot of it's administrative, and then there are a million ways to go with that. And football, you have to maintain it. You absolutely have to. If you do not, you are killing yourself, because that is football is your economic driver. It's your machine. I mean, Iowa made $173 million in the last fiscal year in the athletic department. Around 150 is directly part of football. So you just cannot say, well, this year we're going to give we're going to go down to 12 million for football players,
Yeah.
and we're going to give it to baseball, women's basketball to even things out. Forget it. You just can't do that. You just got to say 70% goes to football. If that's the number, that's it. We're not touching it. That's football's money, and then go on.
The task really for Beth, Scott, is what you're saying, is to figure out how to allocate funds to make everybody competitive against the competition, whether it be, with baseball and softball is obviously different because we're northern, right?
Yeah.
It's a different, what's Iowa, what schools is Iowa competing with in baseball and softball? Football, basketball, all different, right? But
Yeah.
you have to make your programs as competitive as possible against their competition with the resources you have, which has always been the case. It's just that the resources are different now. They're coming from different areas, and you're paying the people that are performing the labor, so to speak.
Right. And you got to look to your peer institutions to see how they do things. And, just as kind of eye over the shoulder, just to say, how are they doing it? Because,
Right.
Nebraska is a good gauge when you look at this type of stuff, because they're invested in similar ways and their passions are real similar. How are they going to do it? They're going to do the same thing in football because they believe in it that much. After that, women's volleyball is their number 2 sport. It is a money-making sport for them, but they also are invested in basketball, men's and women's, kind of like Iowa. So you look at their big four, but baseball is probably a little more significant. They made close to $1 million in baseball revenue and ticket sales. So they're going to invest in baseball. Well, they're going to have to take away from something else, because you just can't feed everybody the same. And, what do you believe in track? What do you believe in all these other things? And ultimately, that's where you've got to decide. We're in a northern climate, so that's going to feed into it. What players can you attract? What would you have to overspend to get, and what's the value rate of return here? And
just traveling expenses for the northern schools at this time of year, having to go play south in baseball and softball.
Yeah.
Schools in the South don't face that. They're not coming up to Minnesota to play baseball games in February.
Right. And, which is a fear for me, I'm sure for everybody else, because you look at baseball in our region. Wisconsin's out, Iowa State's out, UNI's out. I think Drake's out. Iowa has a great coach, but how much longer is Rick going to be doing this? What's the future hold? I mean,
Does he have the resources to compete against the other teams he's competing with?
yeah,
How do his facilities match up with those around the Big Ten?
exactly. And whether it's Nebraska and Minnesota and Indiana and Illinois, which I think teams you look to try to be like would be the three, which is the two I's in, which
Mhm.
is Indiana, Illinois, and Nebraska. Maryland and UCLA, you just don't think about. You
Yeah.
just say they're different. But you worry about those three. But what happens when the pie, your piece of the pie is too small and you can't get there? Is it just merely competing and playing baseball? Is that healthy?
Yeah.
And that's the scary existential questions for these sports and in this environment, which is you look at the SEC. I mean, there's a reason why a lot of these programs have only 16 sports because their resources are dedicated to football. Everything is
Yep.
about football. And now they're really great in other ones. Baseball, they expend a lot of energy in. Women's gymnastics,
Yeah.
basketball, women's basketball, probably more than men's, although this year in men's basketball, they're out of this world. But beyond that, in track, what else? Minnesota, it's ice hockey. Iowa, it's wrestling. You know, the other ones, you just either move on from or you just give them bare bones. And then if you're giving them bare bones, they just, how effective is that? If you're, we saw it when they eliminated three sports officially a
Yeah.
couple of years ago. But, for Iowa, I don't know. I mean, what else, is there? And that to me is baseball is the one that I'm most worried about. Let's put it that way, because it commands some money and resources. And if you can't compete at a high level, and Rick is a great coach, I would give him whatever he can get. But how much longer is he going to be doing this? And what's your next coach? And then what's your likelihood? If you can't, you're supposed to get a new facility, you couldn't get it because somebody pulled out. And that's a concern I would have about baseball long term. It's like, are we better off not having it and worrying about the other sports? And it's stuff you got to think about.
Let's tie this into what we talked about before we started recording in terms of the story you did this week on The Athletic about the revenues for the fiscal year 2024 and what you took out of that holistically and what your view is from an Iowa standpoint, because I think that will take us into our next discussion about men's basketball, which we'll do after the break, which we'll do after we hit this uh, kind of discussion on the money that's there now, um, how it's revenue that's being generated, and I think that kind of paints a picture of where Iowa stands as well, like we talked about against like-minded, like-approach schools and programs and athletic departments.
Yeah, I think, first, anytime you get into this discussion, you got to talk football. And Iowa's football numbers are pretty strong in every area, and it's led to good, solid performances. I mean, everybody, we're going to complain about whatever, but when you look again, take it from the 20,000 foot view, not that, damn it, that 3rd and 4 call was bad. It's when you look at like coaching salaries, and for the fiscal year of 2024, which ended July 1st, Iowa was 5th in coaching salaries among the 16 public schools. I don't get materials from Northwestern or USC because they're private. Ohio State was 1, Penn State 2, Oregon 3, Michigan 4, Iowa 5. All 5 programs won at least 10 games that year. The teams that spent the least, Purdue at 10 million. Iowa spent 19.2 on their coaching staff for football that year. Purdue spent the least at 10 million and UCLA a little under 12. Neither one has that same coaching staff.
Yeah.
So those are things that you think about. Where does Iowa fit in? Same thing with staffing. dedicated staff. I mean, the top four now. Um, Rutgers figured it out differently, so they actually looked like they spent double everybody else, but it was, I think what they were doing was allocating like assistant athletic director. Well, he works with football, so we'll put him in this category.
Okay, yeah.
So I'm not going to put them in that. I think that's a little high. But out of the next four in staffing, Penn State, Ohio State, Washington, and Iowa. And again, they all won at least 10 games because you have to invest and to win. And if you believe in your coaching staff, then that's helpful. Now, last year was a little bit of a step back for Iowa. They won 8, and they were on the cusp of winning more, but they didn't. But they're still very competitive when you consider their peers and what the ups and downs that those schools, Wisconsin or Nebraska or even Minnesota from time to time, goes through. Iowa's in good position, and you need to do that. You need to. Bob Bowlesby realized this 20 years ago. You're going to have to overpay to elevate your place in the world. You just have to. And then when I look at gate receipts for football, the tiers haven't changed among the new teams in the Big Ten, except for USC. I don't know about. So that one's kind of a question mark. But Michigan, Ohio State, Penn State all led the way in ticket sales. The next tier, Iowa's in that group. Washington sold a lot. They went to the national title game. But Oregon, Nebraska, Wisconsin, Iowa, and Michigan State were all in between 24, and Michigan State was the last at a little under 20 million. That's your group. How do you perform among your peers? And they're successful year in and year out. So that, but then you look at the very bottom, Maryland is by far the worst, 7.2 million. And UCLA, 8.3 million. That's dangerous territory. Iowa's at 22 million, and sometimes feels that it's not the way to go. Now, a couple other things would be like non-revenue sports. There are only 2 in the Big Ten that actually made money: Minnesota men's hockey and Nebraska women's volleyball. Now, when it comes to ticket sales, other than hockey, which has its own little system, Iowa women's basketball sold the most in tickets, the 3.2 million. Of course, the media rights angle prevents Iowa from making money in women's basketball. But there is a correlation between invested fan success, ticket sales, gate showings, and success for women's sports on the court and on the court. You've got Nebraska and Wisconsin volleyball led the way in that sport with 2.5 million in ticket sales, 1.65 million in ticket sales. They both ended up in the Final Four. And then Minnesota was really high at $800,000, and they're a very good program. In basketball, you had Iowa, of course, went to the championship game. Indiana went to the Sweet 16, and its loss was to South Carolina. Some others, you saw Ohio State, high investment. Nebraska, both of them over 850,000. Minnesota was really high at 870. Last year wasn't a real good year, but they also had Caitlin Clark come, and they sold the place out. She helped a lot of people last year. But and then of course wrestling, at Iowa and Penn State were pretty high. But then there's the one that's a little bit down when it comes to Iowa, and that's men's basketball. And we already know this. And I don't know if you want to save this for after the break, but it does lead into where we are where the Iowa.
Let's have put that out there. That'll take us into the break, and we'll come out the other side, talk about last night's game and kind of just another week behind us with the Iowa men's basketball program, because I think we're all on the same page. That things need to be addressed. The program needs to be addressed at some point here after the season. So,
No
I mean,
question.
that's kind of where we are. And Scott's numbers are going to tell you part of the story. And if you go to Carver Hawkeye Arena to a men's game this year, that'll tell you some of the story too.
Exactly. I mean, it was like the best crowd against Wisconsin that I'd seen all year, and except for maybe Iowa State, but still, neither one was full either.
Yeah.
They weren't sold out, and those are typically games that get sold out.
2 of your biggest rivals at home.
Yeah.
I mean, Saturday afternoon. Weather was fine.
Yep, it was a great
And
day.
yeah.
And they had what, 10,000, I think was, and that seemed about right, but
Mhm.
still that's not good,
Yep.
And now last year, the last fiscal year ended June 30th, 2024. Iowa had was 12th among the 16 schools with $2.96 million in ticket sales. And as I brought up before, the last fiscal year, Iowa had reached 4 million ticket sales, was 2005. So that's the current one that we're in. And the way it's going, Rob, it wouldn't shock me if there was only $2 million this year in ticket sales. So half of what was done 2 decades ago. And that is a number you cannot accept as Iowa, because the peer group that Iowa used to be in, I mean, Indiana had 15.2 million and only 10 in football. So obviously that'll go up this year. But that's, you're not in Indiana's realm, just like you're not in Ohio State's realm for this.
Right.
But your peer group of Illinois, Michigan State, Purdue from the old days, Illinois sold 9.36 million, Purdue 8.18, Michigan State almost 7.8. You're at 2.96. You should be in that 6 to 7 range. I mean, Wisconsin's almost at 7 million.
Okay. I was going to ask about Wisconsin, Nebraska, and Minnesota.
Yeah, let me I didn't write those. Let me but I
I'm
did write
figuring
them down.
Minnesota's probably closer to Iowa because they just haven't had success. So
Yeah.
that's more that one is easier to explain. Although Nebraska hasn't had a ton of success either, but they just seem to support all of their programs.
They are very good about that at Nebraska. I mean, we've seen it, like, I mean, it was funny, 15 years ago, people would make fun of them for their basketball because they were not very successful, but they would make fun of them, for attendance. Well, their attendance is better than Iowa's.
Oh
And,
yeah.
and they're,
Whenever I flip on a Nebraska game, it seems like their arena's pretty much full.
yeah. All right, let's see. Behind Iowa is Oregon at 2.5 million. Minnesota, which is 2.39 million. So it's not that far off,
Yeah.
frankly. 15 is Washington at 2.16 million, and then Penn State is last at 1.83, which,
Not surprising.
yeah,
If you've ever covered a basketball game at Penn
yeah.
State, it's
But the big difference is, Rob, that those schools, the ones below Iowa, all saw increases. Iowa saw a $600,000 drop.
wow.
And so that's significant. And we know this year is going to be at minimum another $600,000 drop. So you're seeing, and based on what we've seen on the floor, that's not commensurate with the product. There are other factors, and that's certainly a major reason. So, and then I also looked at recruiting costs. Iowa is in a weird spot because they don't
We're talking
put,
men's basketball or
oh,
overall program.
I could do well. Basketball, they're all right. Men's, I'm sorry, football. Iowa is last by a far amount because it applies its recruiting software in a different category than everybody else. They would be in the same ballpark.
Yeah.
I'm convinced, because like the category other costs for recruiting is like $3 million, and everybody else in their peer group, Oregon, Wisconsin financial peer group, is like $700,000. So, it's like,
Yeah.
just move it over here. And they explain, well, this is what they tell us to do. I'm like, yeah, but everybody else does it differently. So at any rate, and Iowa was there was, out of the 16 schools, 8 lost money, some significantly, like UCLA, over a 5-year period is at $200 million.
Wow.
Rutgers lost more than $40 million last year. And in Maryland is inching forward, but they still are repaying from the borrowing during when it wasn't a vested member. And then you
Yeah.
have Michigan State lost a ton of money too. It's kind of a weird financial breakthrough there, but and Ohio State was in the dumps. I mean, Ohio State spent 292 million and made 254, but a lot of that was due to it was let me train of thought here. It was because they only had 6 home games for football,
Yeah.
and then when they had 8, they expected to do a lot better. So.
Yeah. That all makes sense. And obviously, the run down there from an Iowa perspective shines the spotlight back on the men's basketball program and kind of, the obvious need for something to be done now after the season's over, whatever. I'm sure that process is in the works now, because something needs to be done to get that going back in the right direction, whether it's with Fran McCaffrey or without. We'll talk about that more after the break and talk about last night's big win. Obviously, want to give that some attention because it was much needed and impressive, and it's a fun team when it plays well. It really is entertaining to watch. Um, Support for the podcast comes from Systems Unlimited, celebrating 50 years of providing services to people living with disabilities and mental health needs throughout East Central Iowa. A list of their services and upcoming events can be found at sui.org. That is sui.org. We're going to hear from a few more sponsors now, and we'll be back after the break to talk some men's hoops. Hang tight. Have a good day. And we are back to let you know that switching is easy. We do it all the time. We switch on the lights, we switch TV channels. Some of us switch partners while square dancing. Well, that's a stretch, but what's not a stretch is how you can switch and save with State Farm. In fact, State Farm agent Chad Birch right here in Iowa City can switch you over so you can start saving today. Chad and his team are ready to welcome you to the State Farm neighborhood. With Chad Birch, it's easy to switch and save. Just give him a call when you want the real deal. Like a good neighbor, State Farm is there. Black Angel Restaurant, downtown Iowa City. Perez Brothers owned and operated, formerly of El Banditos and Perez Tacos. Excellent food, downtown Iowa City. Live music on the weekends. It's free. The music's free. The food isn't. But excellent food. Go check them out. Black Angel Restaurant, Iowa City. Scott, that game last night had kind of a feel in the first half like, oh no, here we go again. It's just, I don't know how many threes they ended up with in the first half. It was 8, at some point, maybe that's what they finished the first half with, but just it had those ingredients of not another one of these. To Iowa's credit, a lot of contributions from a lot of different guys in key moments. Lajay Dembele, one of his better games as a Hawkeye. Peyton Sanford, key plays. Josh Dix is best player on the team. And not having Owen Freeman, not having Cooper Koch, Felwell being hurt. I mean, it's been a tough season for this team. You don't blame injuries, but to fight through what they've fought through to get a win last night on the road says a lot about this team, the character, the drive to keep pushing forward when things are going against you. Not always easy to do in sports. And I think we saw it at the end with Fran McCaffrey's interview with Andy Katz on the floor and emotion there. Peyton Sanford's interview. You just kind of see that these guys really, really needed this one.
Yeah, it's been and it's been a stressful year, and there's a lot of adversity with this team, and we've talked about it.
We just talked about it before the break.
Right.
Low attendance impacts this. They feel this. They feel that empty arena.
Exactly. And there's been a lot said. We've said it. I've said it, and probably will continue to say it. But that said, you don't take away what they did last night and how they feel as human beings about what they accomplished, and to be down the way they are, and last week's games, they don't get a bouquet of flowers necessarily, but damn, they played hard. They played really hard against two really good teams that are going to be tournament teams for sure. If not a Big Ten champion in Purdue, even though they lost the other day. But and then to come back, and they were down 11 late in the first half. It looked like it was one of those games where, all right, yeah, but and they were playing against two lottery picks in Ace
Yeah.
Bailey and Dylan Harper, and yet they really contained them. They played well. They played together. They got good performances from players who needed to have good performances. They've had those, three players started that have been really inconsistent this year, at best, inconsistent, if not bad at times. Yet they came out and played really well. You look at Brock Harding, much maligned Brock Harding. He had 13 points, 7 assists, 1 turnover, and 3 steals. He had to play 35 minutes because Drew Thelwell couldn't go. That's a stepping in and having a really good game. And then, Laji Dembele, lost his starting job. He's been up and down, with 9 points, 4, rebounds. And, Traore was up and down and is typical, but still had 6 rebounds. It's just, they're playing as hard as you can play. And you always worry about that with a team like this, that's kind of trending in the wrong direction and has a tough schedule and things aren't going their way, yet they're competing. And, again, what it means to me is they're playing for their coach too. And you can't take that lightly, because the fans have checked out, the players haven't. And that means something.
Agreed, because we all see it. If you're listening to this podcast, Scott and I see it. What's the narrative? What are people talking about? Fran's checked out. He's not, he doesn't have the emotion anymore. He's not invested.
Yeah.
The players are going through the motions. I think the last 3 games have told us that's not the case, Scott, and you've said that as well just now. And that's what you want, right? That's healthy. That looks like a healthy program. Just doesn't have the horses now.
Yeah.
Owen Freeman obviously is an enormous loss. And we talked about other guys that have been in and out of the lineup, this year, Traore and Thelwell now. And it's been, guys here and there, but they've stuck together, and they still, they're not packing the season in. They're not like, oh shit, look at the rest of our schedule, we're never going to make the tournament. They believe they can make it, and you don't tell them they can't make it. They put a lot of work into this and a lot of effort into this every single day, and it's good to see that last night when it pays off for them. It's not, the big picture we still talked about, right? This program needs addressing, from administrative things to the coach's investment. How invested is he into fixing this? And is he willing to help fix this in any way he can? All of these things need to be addressed, but it should give people, make people feel better that the program's not a disaster. This does not feel like the end of the Licklider era. You lived through that too. Completely different feel right now. You've got the winningest coach in the history of the program. It's a difficult situation, Scott, and one that over the next several months we're going to see play out, but certainly something that can't be ignored.
Yeah. And there are areas we can talk about both sides on this one all day and night, which is the unhealthy part of it. And we've droned on that, and we will again at some point. But I think today, in some ways, I do want to kind of give them their props, because it is a tough situation. This, the areas that this team was a detriment on, defense, of course, but also rebounding margin. They were by far the worst in the Big Ten. And then you lose your leading rebounder, but you out rebound Rutgers by 4. That's important and impressive. And a team that's traditionally been very well coached in Rutgers looks like to me that Steve Peichel sold his basketball soul to get 2 one-and-dones. They just do not have any chemistry whatsoever and do
No.
not play well together at all. And I mean, they'll be better off as a program when they go on to the next level, because they just certainly do not play like a
No.
quality program right now.
No, they've had some really, like, you think about some of those good teams he's had, Scott,
Yeah.
defend the hell out of you, man. They
Yeah.
would get up in you, physical. That team last night looked nothing like that.
Yeah. And you just, Dylan Harper has 11 points and 2 rebounds and 4 turnovers against Iowa.
Yeah.
Come on, and
You know
but
what?
I'm
Don't
yeah,
make these kids go to college, man. Seriously, just let them go to the league if they want.
yeah, yeah. It's kind of that point now, especially with those two. But that being said, Rutgers is Rutgers, and Iowa won its first game on the road, and for a long time they have looked really bad on the road. They've gotten really beat down in a lot of these games. Ohio State, Wisconsin, the list goes on and on. This time, and maybe it's only this time, but it's still this time, they busted their ass to win that game. And they came back and they played better basketball. They didn't have the better athletes, but they played better basketball. And as you said, Josh Dix just continues to be an impressive player. Whether it's his mid-range jumper, to how he distributes, to what he does on the floor, it's really impressive. And imagine if he actually got to shoot free throws for his fouls. He only had 2. But and Peyton Sandford is kind of that streaky player, but he's still got 20 points, and he is the lifeblood, the emotional lightning rod of this program, because he plays with his heart on his sleeve. And as you said, I was there at the end. I went home and away with Iowa at the end of the Licklider era. This is nowhere near shape or form like that. That was a dead team walking. And I've seen Fran teams that struggled emotionally, that have kind of struggled down the stretch, that just felt like they just can't do it anymore. They're burned out more than checked out. But this is not one of them. And, and that said, they still have a really tough rest of the schedule. They got to go to Maryland. That is not going to be easy, and, they got to go to Illinois. That is a horrific matchup. They might have
Yeah,
a chance against
that's
Michigan
one
State.
that's one of the tougher road games in this league is Maryland.
Yeah. I mean, Maryland, but Illinois, who leads the country, or they were in rebounding margin, and Iowa's so depleted and already down before that. And we've seen it before. Great Iowa teams have gone to Illinois and gotten murdered. So this one could be even worse. But this team, you wouldn't rule them out at home against Oregon or at Nebraska or at Northwestern. Maybe even at home against Michigan State. When they play with this effort, that's tough for teams to match, because you have to match it. You can't go out through the motions and just make things happen. And I expect them to beat Washington for sure. But what the win did was, now they're going to be at least in Indianapolis.
Mm-hmm.
They're 5-8. There are 4 teams below them in the win column, and then Rutgers, which is 5-9. It gives them a chance to, as long as they beat Washington and they're at 6 wins, the chances are they're probably going to get in, unless they lose to like Northwestern. That would be kind of the one that would stand
Which
out.
certainly could happen.
Yeah. So, but all that's for another day. I really think that this team deserves a pat on the back for how it performed. For guys like Evan Bronze and Riley Mulvey, who, they're playing hard when they're out there. They're not the most talented players, certainly, but they're out there doing what they need to do. And I think that's, again, something you got to look at.
Yeah, the concern, I think, in addition to it being a tough opponent at Maryland, Scott, Dix played 39 minutes last night. Peyton played 38 and a half, 35 for her. I know these guys are young guys, but it's different when you're on the road. It's just the rotation was pretty tight last night. And, if Thelwell can get back, that's obviously a benefit there. But they're going to be challenged here down the stretch, because I think it's probably best to tighten the rotation and lean on, especially Josh and Peyton. I think you just got to let them shoot. I was watching the game last night with my son Alex, and Dix took a contested shot, and I was like, I'd rather see him take that than somebody else, have a wide open shot.
Right.
Because that's just kind of the way the makeup of this team is. So those two guys are going to have to really, really carry the offense here a lot and open things up for others.
And if there's something that the Big Ten has to address, and we've talked a lot, or maybe not us, but in general, about scheduling going to the
Yeah.
West Coast coming east, and all this stuff. Going to Rutgers and Maryland back to back, but Wednesday and Sunday is not economical,
No,
and it's really it's a bad series of trips. The Big Ten coaches, one of their scheduling principles is that they want 2 days between games at minimum.
this is basketball,
Yeah,
right? Just
yeah, no,
men and women.
yeah, men
Okay.
and women, but specific to men's
Okay.
basketball, certainly not football.
No.
but
Someday maybe they'll do the 2 day turnarounds.
well, good luck with that. But they but then this is the 3 day, but
Right.
they had to fly all the way to Newark, go to Piscataway, play a game, stay overnight, play a game, get back late, go to class today and tomorrow, fly out Saturday, go to Maryland. I don't know if they're going to Baltimore or DC, go there, stay Saturday night, come back. In a perfect world, Rob, wouldn't they be playing Friday night? Even though it's a 1 day prep, but one trip, two teams like that.
Thursday, Sunday?
Yeah, Thursday, Sunday, or whatever. But their scheduling principles are 2 days off in the middle.
Yeah.
And I don't know that that's always the smartest for some of these teams, that even though it's a long trip, but they're kids. This is basketball. If you're flying from UCLA and you're playing Indiana and Purdue, maybe just have a day off in the middle,
Yeah.
or a game, practice in the middle, like you do the NCAA tournament.
Mhm.
I just I think that extra day is counterproductive, and I think the coaches could, instead of marking it as a principle or a primary tenet, say it's a preference instead. I think that would be smarter for some of these teams, and Iowa would be among them, because if, again, you're making 2 East Coast flights within this short period of time, why not have it, again, you fly to Newark, play the game in Piscataway, you take the bus or something to DC, and you
Yeah.
play Friday night, Saturday morning, something like that, and then you get back, instead of, because flying back at that late at night, because it takes time once you get to the airport. And now, granted, they're doing it privately, so it's easier, but still, that's, and then you're on, and your muscles are tightened up when you're, even if
Got
you're,
class.
yeah, you got class sometimes early, 8 a.m.
Yeah.
or whatever, and you're getting back at 2. And I'm sure some people, have, I don't know, maybe they even have to have, their hydration issues,
Yeah.
they're cramping up, playing that much. I mean, and then it's cold as F coming back.
Yeah.
I mean, can you imagine? It's like you get all the way back and it's 2:30, and it's like, oh, I got to get out of my car, So
Yeah,
I don't.
it's not a good setup, and it's something I think they need to continue to work through, scheduling wise. And situations like this will certainly be brought up during meetings and say, listen, look at what Iowa did here. Iowa, that is an example, but I'm sure there are plenty of other examples too. And it's
Yeah.
just, we got to do something to address this for a number of reasons. And hopefully they do. But uh, Maryland is the next game, and they'll head out and play that one this weekend. The women are tonight against Rutgers. Um, we may have this weekend the Ben Keeter, Gable Steveson match up. Hopefully that's the case. So that's, if you're a wrestling person, that's something to look forward to this weekend as well. If you're an Iowa person, you certainly, I think, enjoyed the Super Bowl, at least to a degree, because there are a lot of Chiefs fans that are Iowa fans, and that was
Yeah.
not a good scene, man. But um, you think you think about it and you're like, okay, let's come up with scenarios. What would be a good, rookie season for Cooper DeJean? And how might it end? How about if he like picks off Patrick Mahomes in the Super Bowl and returns it for a touchdown? How would that be for a storyline? It's just kind of one of those things, Scott, where you're just like, man, this is pretty cool. And I know you went and did a story on Cooper in his hometown and met with his family. I didn't do as much. I interviewed him at State Track before he got here and kind of got a feel for who he was and watched him compete in person in another venue other than football. And just, it's like, yeah, this is a different cat. And he's shown that continually. And I'll throw it to you. And what I'll say is the thing I enjoy most about Cooper is he has fun doing what he does. He loves what he does. And you can see it in him that he's having the time of his life. And he's put in a lot of work to get there. That's kind of what you hope for people, right?
Yeah, you love to see people get their rewards for that. And and in his case, he was a fantastic athlete. I think when we recognized it back in high school, he was one of the, you could make the case he's one of the 10 greatest athletes in state history, based on what he did. His sequence at the end of that, I think it was a second state championship football season
Mm-hmm.
where, I can't remember play for play, but there was like a 10 play sequence there where he was impactful on every single play to help them win that game and coming back. And then to do what he did at Iowa, he was well on his way to, he was an All-American, first team All-American, and
Yeah.
then got hurt, and that sucked because they could have really used him on
Yeah.
offense. And and then he's to finish to cap his rookie year where he's the highest graded cornerback by Pro Football Focus his rookie year without intercepting a pass.
40th pick?
Huh?
40th pick in the draft?
I think that's right. Yeah. Yeah. 40. So he was overlooked. There were some people, as always, frowning on
And
him.
you look at teams like the Eagles and the Ravens and teams that continually do well, they draft these kids when
Exactly.
others pass.
Right. The Eagles traded up for him.
Yep.
They were debating between him and Quinyon Mitchell, and they just figured longer outside corner, they're all right. And then it's like, we got shot here. So then they traded up with Washington in, their divisional rival to go get Cooper DeJean. And you look at the way their defense was last year, they were
Yeah.
so bad in the secondary. They lost like 4 or 5 in a row, and everybody wanted Nick Sirianni fired, and the fans are yelling at him. And he changes some staff members. They go out and they draft these guys, and Cooper completely solidified that secondary. His coverage is as impressive as the interception was, and it was fabulous. But his coverage of Travis Kelce and the others were just amazing. And so you look at what he was able to do there, and then get the interception. And I would even say, I imagine most Cyclone fans were probably cheering for him too. Small town Iowa kid. I think that they were probably like, "Wow, that's cool." But then, except for the Chiefs fans, which I understand, that would suck to have to deal with that.
Yeah. Him winning a Super Bowl in his rookie year after Tristan did it, man. It's
Yeah,
pretty big stuff happening out of the Hawkeye state.
yeah. I'm sure you got this question too. Was it the most impressive Super Bowl performance by a former Hawkeye? And I did a story, kind of a ranking of that a few years ago. And I don't want to get deep into recency bias because that's kind of unfair,
Mhm.
but I would put it alongside Bob Sanders in '06
Yeah.
against he was the reason they won the Super Bowl, not Peyton Manning. He should have been the MVP. Through the course, I know that this is a Super Bowl, but through the course of the year, they were last in the NFL in yards per carry allowed. He was out all but 4 games. And then he comes back in the playoffs, and none of the running backs and none of the teams in the AFC portion of it had 100 yards rushing because of him. And then in the Super Bowl, he has a forced fumble in the first quarter. He had an interception that he brought back 38 yards, no touchdown. And he had several devastating hits on the Bears. And so Cooper's impact was on that same level. And I don't know how to measure it as better versus just merely the same. And then you got Tim Dwight, of course, who, but that one, incredible return, 240 yards, I think, kick return yards that game because they got kicked to a lot for a reason. But that was a little bit behind for me just because they didn't win and they were kind of blown out. And then a couple of old Vikings, Paul Krause and Wally Hilgenberg. Yeah. Wally Hilgenberg had 13 and a half tackles in Super Bowl IV against Ed Podolak's Chiefs. So that was pretty big deal. And and Paul Krause had an interception and forced fumble and a bunch of tackles too. So
I think however you rank him, he's in the discussion with the other stories that you brought up, and that's cool, man. It's cool to see that going. And Tristan's performance in the Super Bowl is probably hard to measure, but I'm sure it was good.
Yeah, I'd have to go back and check PFF, right? Whatever.
Because that, like Peyton Manning, that was not Tom Brady winning that Super Bowl. That was that Tampa defense, and they had a good offensive line too.
Yeah. I mean, they beat Kansas City decisively, and Tristan was a major factor. Well, there's a reason why first of all, Tristan doesn't get enough credit too. He became first team All Pro left tackle. He's the only player in NFL history to be first team All Pro at both right and left tackle. Yeah. I'm waiting for him to get kicked inside the guard like some of the people said he should. And then he's also the highest paid offensive lineman of all time. So there's a reason for that. Yep. They don't just hand that to anybody. And I'll say this, and this is not Super Bowl related, but Alaric Jackson's going to get paid too.
Oh, yeah.
He's had a really good 4-year period with the Rams, and whether the Rams do it or somebody else does it, he's a starting left tackle in this league, probably one of the top 15 at that position at least. I would expect him to get a massive payday.
Yeah, and we're going to be talking a lot more NFL, Hawkeyes, things like that. Sorry, it was a message from Brian Ray asking me if I'm still shooting women's basketball games. I'll answer that text later.
Yeah.
What was I saying?
I don't. NFL draft.
Oh yeah, NFL draft. We've got more NFL stuff coming up. Scott's going to be at the combine in a couple weeks. Next week, he is going to be at the SEC Big Ten meetings in New Orleans. So we will push the podcast next week till Friday. Then the following week for the combine, it'll probably be a later in the day podcast, and we'll let you know which day that is, but just kind of stay tuned. I'll get that information out there as well. But obviously, Caleb Johnson and the guys that are in the draft for Iowa, it's always a fun time of year to watch these guys kind of live out their dreams. So we'll definitely follow that on the podcast and follow more of the conclusion of the men's and women's basketball teams. Spring football will be here before you know it. More recruiting stuff. It's a little quiet time for football right now. They're unfortunately for the guys, or fortunately for the guys, they're going through the grueling winter conditioning programs right now. So huge. I know we don't see it, Scott, but such an important time of the year for football in preparations for 2025.
Absolutely. This is the foundational period for the next season. And it's for everybody. Every single person has, whether it's to cut your 40, they don't do times on 40s, but let's say you cut your 40 time from 4.6 to 4.5. Or if you're a lineman, if you're Trevor Lauk or if you're Jack Dotzler, or Will Nolan even, and you're saying, hey, for spring football, I want to be the left tackle. This is your time. This is what does it. How much mass you put on, how much strength you add, what you do in your squat, this all points to that. So it is a pivotal time. And what's probably healthy for the program now that, signing day isn't a big deal anymore. This time they only had one. Recruiting is kind of at they're kind of in between junior days and stuff like that. basketball's taken the lion's share of the conversation now. So they're kind of in the background, and that's pretty healthy, I think, just
Mhm.
for program perspective. But it'll ramp up here pretty quickly. I mean, once you go to the combine, then they're going to start talking about themselves and other people, and then get into spring ball. Once the basketball season concludes and whatever the culmination is of what happens with the coaching staffs, men's staff, then we'll kind of
Yeah.
go from there.
Pro day, a lot of good stuff coming up.
Yeah.
We'll get back into football before you know it. But yeah, I think with this one has we've covered what we can cover here. Again, the women play tonight at home against Rutgers. Looks like the snow's out of the area at least for a day or so. So shouldn't
Yeah.
have trouble getting to the game, but be careful out there if you are driving tonight because the roads are still have some precipitation on them, and it's also chilly. So I don't think this stuff's going to melt too soon. And so be careful out there. And thank you for listening to the Hawkeye Hotspot podcast. Thank you so much to our sponsors. Please check them out if you are a listener to the podcast because they help us bring you these things free of charge. And that's probably what they're worth, right? Uh,
Yeah.
but have a good weekend. And remember, next week it'll be Friday for the Hotspot podcast, but I will send out a reminder for that maybe Thursday or early Friday morning next week to let you guys know. So thanks again for listening. We'll talk to you next week. Say goodbye, Scott.
Goodbye, Scott.